So, hello everyone. Hope you guys have been doing well. It's been a long time since I've seen you. So, just for today, I'm not going to speak for a long time. I'm just going to share a little bit. When I was kind of asked to take a devotion tonight, I didn't know what to say, but I remembered a little kind of study that I did on the idea of thirst in the Bible, and I thought it would be pretty cool to just share tonight. And it's pretty relevant to what we're all going through at the moment. So I'll get right into it. What I want to address today is the way in which God can use our shortcomings and the way that He can use our desperate seasons to glorify Himself and to demonstrate His providence for us. I'm basically going to go through 4 points, and we'll just have some time for discussion and talking about them much better after that. So, firstly, when we think of desperation, it's really a sign of the times for us at the moment. It underlies so much of what we go through and the patterns of our world. Just the unusual, the once in a lifetime experience of living through a pandemic. We're seeing everyone in different situations that people are really being pushed to the edge. People are desperate mentally, people are desperate financially, spiritually, on so many levels. I find that desperation is something that we all deal with, and it underlines so much of what we live and deal with. A lot of the problems in our world and in the Bible, when you actually look into them, you find that desperation is somewhere in the root. So an issue like, say, sex and everything that can come, all the issues that can come out of it, if you look into it, it's all about desperation for connection or for power. Stuff like politics, is it desperation for acknowledgement or recognition? And even good things, such as our careers, stuff that we care about. It could be deep down, it could be just about getting approval or status by people around us. Or something like love, even love, something that you never think is bad. We can actually, at the root of that, we could just be looking for love as a way to fulfill a hollowness that we have inside of us. So, it's just good to start by recognizing that there's so many things in our lives that we might not see, but underneath them, it's something that we're desperate for. It's something that we deeply need to fulfill. And if we go the wrong way about it, a lot of the issues that we're going to go through now come up. So when we take a Christian perspective on this, the Christian point of view doesn't actually reject the idea that we're imperfect or desperate because we have some sort of deficiency in us, but it actually just rejects the way that the world tends to go about this deficiency. So going back to that idea of thirst, which is the way I'm gonna go through today, the theme of desperation. I'm gonna read through 2 scriptures from the Old Testament, and we'll just see what it has to say about this theme. So the first bit I'm gonna read is from Judges 15:14-19. If anyone wants to pull it up, you can. If you don't, that's right, I'll read it. So it says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him being Samson. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped off his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I've killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called something I can't say. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out. When Samson drank, his strength returned and he revived. So the spring was called something else I can't read, and it is still there till today. I'm going to read the second passage from Exodus 17, and I want you guys to just notice the similarity between um, those two accounts. So this is, talking about the Israelites when they were leaving Egypt. It goes, "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through a sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and their left. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at somewhere, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, 'Give us water to drink.' Moses replied, 'Why do you quarrel with me? Why don't you put the Lord to the test?' Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, 'Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die first?' And Moses cried out to the Lord, 'What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me.' The Lord answered Moses and said, 'Go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you struck down, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and the water will come out of it for the people to drink.' So Moses did this in their sight, in the sight of the elders." So basically, just recapping, if you zoned out, because sometimes I tend to do that. There's Samson. He's in a battle, and I don't know why it's a jawbone, but he managed to kill 1,000 people with it. But now, after doing that great display of strength, his thirst is completely weakening him, and he's kind of collapsing from the inside. He can't. He's so thirsty, and he turns to God, and he's gonna die. On the other hand, the Israelites, God He split the sea for them, and they walk through it, they cross it, they're safe. But because they're thirsty, because they need water, they think they're gonna die, and that's a crisis. Even though there was a display of strength from God, same as Samson, they still think they're alone, they're abandoned. So just a couple of things to take away from these two and just comparing them. The first thing is, in both of those scriptures, we see that we're actually reminded at the start of both that God's faithful. So God was there, and these characters in those two stories, they weren't without proof that God was looking after them. The Israelites, they've just had God split the Red Sea for them, and for Samson, he was given strength to, not that it was new strength, but he was given strength to kill all these people that were coming to him. So it kind of goes to highlight the fact that it's not God that was absent, and hence these people felt like they were abandoned. It's that God was there, but it highlights the fact that it was actually his people's unfaithfulness or their lack of faith that kind of creates the problem. Another point is that in both those stories, the suffering invites questioning of God. So, in Samson's story, he's suffering, he's thirsty, and kind of he just asks God, did you make me fight all these guys so I could die in the hands of the circumcised? Like, why did you do that? Or for the Israelites, they kind of ask God, did you bring us all this way just so you can abandon us now, forsake us now, and we'll die in front of them? Is this some sort of cruel experiment? Like, why are you doing this? And what's significant about that in the Bible is that we actually relate to that. I feel like personally, when things like that happen to me, that's how I approach God. I feel like it's instinctive for me to, start questioning God. when I'm suffering. However, this is not the biblical standard for us. This is not the standard that we're made to follow. This part of the story is not there so we can copy them and then go, did pull me through COVID so I can get bored? I don't know. What happens next in both these stories is actually the standard that these stories is setting for us. So, they both cry out to the Lord, and that's the key part. They cry out to the Lord in their thirst, in their moment of desperation, in their moment of weakness, where, Samson, for all his physical strength that he could have had, I feel like thirst is a very appropriate way to display his weakness, because it still reminds him that, you're imperfect in and of yourself. And in their in their lowest moment, they cry out to the Lord, both of them. And God's response to that is that he delivers replenishment from a place where it shouldn't come. For the Israelites, Moses was told to strike a rock and water will come out of it, which doesn't usually happen when you strike a rock. And the same thing for Samson. God opened up a hollow place and water came out. I think the significance of that in both these stories is saying that despite them being in a moment of despair, they came to the Lord and God made it very clear that it was from him, that he was, providing once again, because that doesn't usually happen. And this really goes to reflect the verse in 2 Corinthians that says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So when we come to God with our weakness, with our desperate situation, God's grace is actually made perfect in that situation. This brings me to my next point, and that is when we take a look at this concept kind of in the New Testament, Jesus was fully God and fully human, and he demonstrated his suffering by reducing himself to a place of desperation. He brought himself down from heaven to the situation that we experience. And his demeanor through that, or his response through his time on earth and through his suffering, is actually the perfect example for us to take on during our suffering. So personally, I always had I had an issue with the idea that when you're in Sunday school, not Sunday school, or youth or young adults, whatever, and the speaker would always say kind of like, come to Jesus or come to God with your issues, tell him about your temptations or your desperations or what scares you, because he was human and he felt it too. And while I heard that and logically, like, I understood it, it just didn't make sense to me that God would relate to a weakness that I have when he doesn't have any weaknesses. It just didn't get through to me. Like, to me, it was a wishy-washy kind of way of saying, God loves you and he cares about you, so just tell him and he'll get it. However, when I was just going through this theme and I was just looking through what the Bible has to say about it, I found it really interesting, the little bit of scripture we're going to go through now, and you'll see why. So, the famous scene where Jesus is being crucified and he's in the process of giving up his life, in John 19, in verse 28, it actually says, so Jesus says he's on the cross, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. To me, when I read that, it goes to show that the same desperation that, his people felt all along these years, the Israelites, Samson, and I'm sure there's many accounts. It's a nice, like, poetic way to reflect that the same desperation that they felt was reflected in Jesus on the cross, because he too was thirsty. But relating to the part before, I was saying, I don't see how you can come to Jesus and say, explain to him why you're desperate and how you're feeling, um, Jesus actually responded the same way in his thirst or his moment of desperation, the same way that the Israelites did, and the same way that Samson did, and the same way I would, and I'm sure many of us would. Just a few verses, or a few moments later, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And I feel like in the same way the people suffering invited questioning of God, Jesus also had that natural instinct to second guess God and his intention. Not and that that to me makes him that much more relatable and that much more human. But Jesus's response or Jesus's demeanor despite that moment of weakness is actually a perfect example. So I feel like despite his suffering, Jesus said, "Your will be done," and he let God turn his test into a testimony that went on to change the world. So, in a way, Jesus, his response to suffering and his response to desperation is our perfect example. It's not about not acknowledging the suffering. It's not about kind of being stoic and just powering through it, mind over matter. It's okay to not understand. It's okay to, hurt or grieve or be confused or feel all the emotions, be angry. But what is, the ideal, what is the biblical goal that we attain for is to just trust in God and push through. It is just to let God through a moment of suffering when we bring it to Him, let Him, demonstrate His grace or demonstrate His provision for us through that. This brings me to my final point, and I'm almost done. And it's that Christ is the only source that can actually fulfill any sort of desperate need that we have. Whatever thirst we feel like we have in our life, whatever stronghold there is, whatever it may be, Christ is actually the only thing that can actually fulfill it. None of the stuff I was saying at the start, none of the money, whatever, relationships, none of that can actually fulfill it. And when I was thinking of this point, I remembered another really famous scene where Jesus was passing through Samaria and he was thirsty and he went to a well and he met the Samaritan woman at the well, and he knew before he talked to her that she was living with a need, a thirst, a desperation to be accepted, and she was looking for that, to fulfill that in many marriages, and she was living at that point with a man who she wasn't even married to. So she looked for acceptance in all these different relationships, and yet she still seemed to crave it when he told her that he can offer her. God, Jesus was saying to her that only He can provide that like living water that can, that doesn't run dry, and that the person who drinks it never thirsts again. And I feel like that's a reminder for us to just remember that whatever feeling we have, whatever craving we feel that we need, only Christ can fulfill it. So, yeah, and one more point that I had about this is that actually, the Samaritan woman, she was, needing acceptance, but Jesus actually used that shortcoming of hers when he met her at the well, and he ended up using her to spread good news in her town. She had found something that was that significant that she went and told everyone. She didn't care. So just going back to the idea that in our shortcomings or in our desperations, whatever season that is, God can actually demonstrate His love for us if we bring it to Him and we put it before Him in prayer. And I think why that is relevant for all of us at the moment is that if we, look around us, a lot of us are going through the same battle. Being stuck at home, feeling like we're not moving, feeling like our life is just paused, and whatever mental problems that can bring up, which is extremely valid. And aside from that common issue that we're having, we're all going through our personal issues. We're all going through our personal hardships, and I just wonder what God could do with this if we bring it to Him. If we put it before Him and say, um, you know, just cry out to the Lord like these people did and like Jesus did. Cry out to the Lord and just say like that Your will be done, and how God can turn whatever season we're individually into a testimony for us to one day share with other people.